What vision do you get when you hear the term Uncle Tom? Usually a black man pandering to a white man. But let's read the definition. So, this definition is from the Oxford Dictionary, and it reads, a black man considered to be excessively obedient or servile to white people. Definition 2, a person regarded as betraying their cultural or social allegiance. But is that entirely true? Well, let's do some research. Now, this term originates from the famous novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, published in 1852, which depicts the life of the fictional character Uncle Tom. Now, this novel was written by a white woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe. Her motivation to write this novel revolves around the autobiography of Josiah Henson, which was published in 1849. Josiah Henson was a black man born on June the 15th, 1789, in Port Tobacco, Maryland. Mr. Henson, or Uncle Tom, was born on a plantation like most black children in that era and experienced a variety of traumatic events. One day, while on the plantation, Josiah's father stood up to his slave master and was severely punished for his act of bravery. Also, as a result of his heroic actions, the slave master sold Josiah's father and split the family apart. Josiah would never see his father again, and he would be sold to numerous slave masters. Mr. Henson experienced terrible injustice himself, such as being beaten by another slave master and two of his slaves for defending his slave master earlier that day. Mr. Henson was beaten to the point of the loss of full functionality in both arms. He would never regain full range of motion in both arms from the injuries. Josiah Henson became a black overseer, or a boss, when he became a young adult. As an overseer, Josiah would steal livestock from the plantation and slaughter them several miles out. He would return the meat to the slaves who rarely had the opportunity to eat. Henson would also ensure that the slaves' cotton bags were filled completely by picking additional cotton. Now, as a boss, Mr. Henson was tasked with transporting other slaves to other plantations, which was a task usually delegated to this particular position. Mr. Henson was also able to earn revenue by preaching at other plantations and proposed a deal to his slave master. Now, with this task given to Josiah by the same slave master that he defended with his life earlier, was also a $450 bill, which $350 were paid up front in cash for exchange for his family's freedom. Mr. Henson received a certificate from Mr. R and instructions on how and why he should protect the certificate and ensure no one would trick him, i.e., Mr. Henson returned from his travels to some terrible news. Mr. R added an extra zero to the remaining $100 balance. When Josiah realized what happened, he spoke on how the situation turned him into a savage and dangerous slave. Josiah was eventually sold to another slave master, Mr. Frank, and plotted to kill him. However, his Christian values and beliefs would not allow him to carry out such an act of violence. Mr. Frank had developed river fever and was cared for by Mr. Henson throughout the entire ordeal. The family acknowledged Mr. Henson for his actions. However, he didn't feel like they had his best interests at heart. So, Josiah escaped to Canada with his family. While on their travels, the Henson family was confronted by a group of Native Americans. One of the Native Americans took a family member and returned them to the village. Moments later, they returned with the family member and their chief. The chief invited them with open arms and extended his generosity with a warm place to sleep, food, provisions, and an escort through the woods to another location. At this location, they encountered a crew of men loading corn onto a boat. After being invited to join the crew by the captain, and the family was able to reach Buffalo. Once in Buffalo, the captain paid for the family's fare to ride a ferry to the village of Waterloo. Once in Canada, Mr. Henson began working at local farms until he was able to accumulate enough money to purchase his own purchase of land, 200 acres to be exact. He also served as a Canadian military officer in the black militia and defeated rebel forces that did not adhere to the laws that outlawed slavery. After the military service, Mr. Henson remained in Canada and fulfilled several duties, such as an abolitionist, I'm sorry if I got that wrong, a minister, and the founder of a laborer's school for runaway slaves that helped them learn new skills and become productive citizens in the local area. As we mentioned earlier, the famous white author Harriet Beecher Stowe published the novel Uncle Tom in 1852. This novel was heavily influenced by her experiences of witnessing the injustices of slaves and Mr. Henson's autobiography. In her novel, Stowe depicts the life of Uncle Tom as he tries to use his position to help his fellow slaves, such as Mr. Henson. However, Uncle Tom did not sell out his people in the novel. The actual sellouts were the two black overseers, Quimbo and Sambo, or the bosses. In the novel, these overseers were cruel to their fellow men and used tactics such as not distributing food fairly or any food at all in the slave quarters. Also, they would beat slaves without mercy and eventually was the cause of the character Uncle Tom's death. They beat Tom to the brink of death. In those last moments, Tom forgave the overseers and they eventually changed their lives. Overall, this term is being used to attack black people who doesn't fit societal or cultural norms or stereotypes in the black community. We use other terms such as black enough, keep or keeping it real, and Oreo to insult black people with different views and opinions. But Uncle Tom is number one to denounce a black person's allegiance to the black race. Yet boss is the number one phrase to symbolize success. Would you rather be a boss or an overseer or an Uncle Tom? Uncle Tom fought against slavery and established education for runaway slaves, while Sambo or boss helped continue the success of slaves. So I ask you, are you an Uncle Tom or a boss?